This is episode 106 of Standing Out. Standing Out is a remarkable interview-style podcast with the intention to highlight women and men making outstanding contributions in their field. Today, I'd like to welcome Paulo Sellitti, founder and executive creative director of Hypnotic Design, a boutique 360-degree disruptive marketing company. Paulo is a creative Bruce Lee, fluid in advertising, entertainment, digital, and social media. He's like water, able to fill a marketing need across any channel. Paulo, welcome and thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you. It's really fun to be here too, Christina.
Thanks. And how does it feel to be a creative Bruce Lee? Like, that's got to be good for the ego.
You know, it's funny. I don't know if it's a boast or more than it is a necessity. It's just when you do multiple things and you're asked to work on a variety of projects, as I have over time, it's just becomes like you have to learn how to do everything from writing to creative direction to marketing, etc.
Well, and this space has just changed so much in the last, I've been in marketing for, I think, 14 years now. And my first job, it was all about billboards, radio, print, that sort of thing. And now it's all digital and social. So how have you evolved through those changes?
Yeah, I remember just getting started when the web, began. And, we went from doing these little GIF banners like on CNET and whatever, and it was just like claim to fame. Hey, I created a 64 frame animation that was under 10K, that was that was the big thing. But, it was interesting because you would have these traditional advertising agencies, and then they created the quote unquote digital role. Right. And then this person was working in a space that, to be quite honest, the other creatives didn't really like. They wanted to do their print and their TV and that sort of thing, and then there were those digital guys on the side. And you wouldn't get a writer. You were basically someone that potentially would concept thing, but you didn't really think big like the other creative, etc. And so over time it became like this, the struggle, and then digital won. And so the people that came strong out of digital suddenly had to learn how to do integrated advertising. And be able to write, be able to program, be able to design, be able to think strategy, etc. And you really just created these like super Goliath types of creatives that basically evolved out of survival.
Right. Have you always been a creative? Is that like a term you've always considered yourself to fit into?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even as a kid, I was drawing and, I just wanted to create comic books and stuff like that. So I always had a proclivity towards that end. It's just different directions in life that push you either towards your goal or away from it. And I had a lot that pushed me away from that goal. And then, here it is. I'm like 45 now. and I'm just sort of finally finding myself.
That's awesome though. Well, like I look at my son, he's 10. I would also consider him a creative. In his room, like there's an entire wall of just the artwork he's done. He's created his own comic book character called Pancake Boy. And he's a few years from college and the job market and all of that, but I wonder like how he'll be able to pull in his creativity in some of the roles he's also kind of thinking of. You know what I mean? He's never mentioned like, hey, I want to be a graphic designer or something to that effect. But I think that creative piece that he has and that you have is so valuable to any role. You know what I mean? It's just it's a unique lens.
Yeah. And, when you talk about that lens, it really is a mindset. I mean, for someone like myself, I think visually. And so when someone explains a concept to me or we have a conversation, I immediately kind of create the picture and the scenario in my mind. And then a lot of times I don't even take notes. I just kind of recognize the picture and then go back to it. But when I work with engineers, they're very methodical, and they think in terms of systems, and even ones that work in like object-oriented programming. That is sort of like this particular system is driven by these these particular instances. So the thinking from a marketer to an engineer to a creative, et cetera, is really just a different type of synaptic construction.
Right.
And in the advantage of being on the creative side is that you can think in terms of the big picture and see what that looks like. But you also have to realize that you're going to work with people that are technology based, work with people marketing based, and understand that perspective as well.
Right.
Because otherwise you're just sort of a creative savant that can think big things but can't communicate or persuade people to do what you need to do.
Yeah. In your life path before you started this creative journey where you jumped in more recently 100%, what were you doing and what brought you to this spot of, you know what, I'm going to do creative work?
Yeah, I mean, um, at one point I was kind of branding myself as the online ad guy, and I was this page takeover, really experiential type of basically display ad type of person, and and Steve Jobs basically killed Flash, overnight with by taking it off the iPad, etc.
Um,
And so then there was this movement towards branded content. And then I worked with a couple of these agencies, and I really found out that if you wanted to do an integrated campaign, what you needed to do was create a centerpiece of content that would create a community, that would create a following, that would catalyze a particular problem that was going on.
right.
And then it would have all these social hooks. So I was fortunate to be a pioneer in the social space and work with with a company that did some of the very first influencer marketing of all time. And and that model of what I learned basically has translated into where I'm at today. And that model wasn't necessarily adopted, and and some of the agencies that I worked at, they just couldn't get their business around it.
Sure.
And they declined. Like, some of them are just not even around anymore because they just wanted to hold on to that TV spot
Right.
and those SAG rights and make all that money off of one big blast of a TV commercial.
Right. I do think I don't watch a ton of TV, but when I do, I notice that commercials have gotten better and they are more integrated. Like, I think Target has done a great job with this recently, where you almost have a mini show in your show sort of thing. And then there's a lot of ties back over on social and digital that kind of bring it all together. And I feel like that's more of a recent adoption or recent sort of trajectory.
Yeah, I'm working with some interesting companies. Like, one of the companies that I have is an AI ABM type of company,
What's
and
account?
account-based marketing.
Mhm.
And so most of the MarTech companies that I'm working with are all in this one-to-one space. But what they have is they have this amazing omni-channel approach where, they're basically having, more and more specific targeted people and segments in that.
Sure.
And then they're having technology evolution that is allowing them to customize their messaging, et cetera. And they're also having things that are like IDs that are just tracking these people. And so what happens is that when you are watching that Super Bowl, or you're, well, it's kind of hard with integrating with TV, but when you do lock into something, like, the
Yeah.
marketers know, and suddenly, like, your computer shifts, and and it's like, hey, you've been searching a lot on life hacking and nutrition, and all of a sudden you're just getting ads for Corella and spirulina every day.
Yeah. No, it's funny how that does shift and you're like, oh, I know when that started, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Doing from a standpoint of I don't know, keeping up with trends? Like, are there books that you like or TED Talks? Like, what inspires you and helps you kind of know what's going on in your in the space?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there's this sort of oblique way of looking at things of like, hey, if I just follow this like trend hunter, or if I just follow BuzzFeed every day, I'll be up on the latest social
Right,
news,
get the
etc.
formula, right?
Yeah, and the reality is that you do need some of that because you kind of have to have an understanding what's going on in the world. But I found that the things that were actually catapulting my personal growth and my business growth forward were not the current trends, but they were the classics. And
Ah,
so,
interesting.
like last night, I just finished reading Poetics by Aristotle.
Mm,
I've the base of my business is around taking the classic structure of storytelling
yeah.
and applying that into characters. Those characters become brand personas, creating basically journeys, and those journeys are become marketing journeys. The tragic flaws, the problems, the obstacles, the guides. And so what I've done is I've basically just gone back and look at all these classical, archetypes in philosophy, in cognitive science, in terms of cognitive biases, also in terms of how to structure and properly tell a story. And then, my free time, I'm on masterclass, and I'm going to watch a class on with Malcolm Gladwell next, or et cetera. But it's
Yeah.
writing. It really is. It's writing. The better you're able to communicate a story and understand the components of writing, the better you are able to do anything in terms of business, marketing, creative, et cetera.
I love that you mentioned masterclass. I have my eye on a course that I keep
Mm-hmm.
wanting to take. I'm like, okay, as soon as I just wrap up this thing and I have a little more space to commit to it, there's a fiction writing course on there that looks super awesome. But I think that
Yeah,
course looks amazing overall.
you have to realize, like,
Master.
during in my day, my normal day, I have a subscription to Skillshare. I've taken classes with Coursera. I have a subscription to lynda.com, which I get free with my LA Public Library card.
Oh,
Uh,
that's awesome. I should look into my library. I don't know about that.
so it's just I don't have the time and the resources to go back to pursue a master's class, or a
Yeah.
master's course, and it's some really expensive Ivy League college, etc.
But you
And
don't
so I've
have to now. Like, isn't that the cool thing?
Yeah, I mean, between iTunes University, between these courses that I take in through now what is LinkedIn's, lynda.com and everything, I'm filling in a lot of gaps. And then I was reading this article the other day about Elon Musk, and he was talking about how general knowledge is what powers your specific knowledge.
Oh,
And so it's suddenly you go like, okay, well, I understand Aristotle's concept.
right.
And let me take an example of that. Like, uh, the root of my business is brand equals category plus difference, and that was a formula defined by Aristotle.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
so I have an advisor named Casey Jones, who basically wrote this paper on definition as the definition of brand. And and anyway, so in coming up with this thing of brand equals category plus difference, that was where I understood of like, okay, so you only really do two things, and I structured the business around it. You're either advertising the problem of the category, or you're creating a defining difference in yourself, and you're creating that difference and making yourself extraordinary, remarkable. So
Right.
I've even heard formulas where it's like brand equals category plus remarkable. And now I understand that because it went back to all the way back to Aristotle. I learned how to tell a story through some of the other things that I've been watching, etc. And then I was able to understand it from a pillar,
Yeah.
when some of the spokespeople in the design community or in the marketing, et cetera, started talking about how they actually do brand.
Right. I'm inspired to go read all the classics now. So like that suddenly sounds so good. As we wrap up, what do you love about your being an entrepreneur or your entrepreneurial journey?
First, I would say I'm not an entrepreneur, and
Okay.
and and the reason why it's an entrepreneur, and I think that there's a funny definition of what an entrepreneur is. I'm a leader, and I would say a visionary and inspiring leader. An
Mm,
entrepreneur, you give $10, they create $10,000 of it with that.
gotcha.
Okay, and so a leader is someone that basically tells a story, paints a vision, creates a following, starts a movement, and gets people to fundamentally follow a particular idea, etc.
Mm,
So what I do is I help entrepreneurs,
right.
because it's I'm not the person that's out there and I basically am touring through India or whatever, and I come across some sort of mind stimulant that frees up my mind and makes me awake, and suddenly it goes, oh, I'm going to turn this into 4-hour energy.
Right. Right.
Like I'm not that person. However, I am the person that meets that person, and they're like, we have this story to tell. We need to market it, and this is what it can do. And then I can paint that picture and help that person tell the story in an amazing way that gets people to say, hey, this is a better way of living, and what we need to do.
Right. I love that. Thanks for not just saying you're an entrepreneur if you don't feel like one. That's perfect. Well, let's end on that note. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Katrina.
You're welcome.